Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda, Cities ABC Open Business Council YouTube podcast series. We are here once again to profile world leader first-class players and as well people changing our cities, our society, our businesses. We are in a very interesting crossroad in the history of humanity because it's probably the time when technology is making us a bit of homo deus for good and for bad. But we are as well among a lot of confusions and challenging narratives. The narratives that can take us to build something exciting or something very disruptive and very dystopian. So in our series that we pass 160 people from global personalities, we've been always focusing how can actually improve our cities, our society, our businesses, but as well to look at first-class players, first-class performers and people that really are creating narratives, but as well creating solutions for the problems we're facing and the challenge we are getting every day. So today I'm quite excited to welcome to our series Daniel Doll-Steinberg. And Daniel is quite a personality that touches a lot of different levels. And I will try to synthesize in the summary, but we're going to be, I think it's a great, exciting interview that I wanted to do for some time. So Daniel starts as a technologist. He's as well a former European Union and the UK advisor to governments, and in the case of the European Union, is the co-founder of a very cool new platform, EdenBase, that is in partnership with Eric van der Clay, one of the companies that I'm looking forward to see how he's going to change the world and growth hacking in terms of business and potential growth companies, in terms of frontier technologies. Is as well behind the strategy and the deployment of the Atari Token project, which was a big project related with gaming and solutions related with gamification and gaming, and as well tokenization, which was a very, I would say, cutting edge project at the time, and now makes more sense than ever. And as well, Daniel has a quite successful background as in investment banking, both in London and New York. And always as a serial entrepreneur, focus on cutting edge innovation, and as well how to look at entertainment, marketing, and health spaces, which were areas that he's been working particularly in his past. During his tenure as working and advising the UK government, the European Union on innovation and education policies, he actually brought a lot of attention to a lot of the things we're going to be talking in this interview, from the so-called fourth industrial revolution to the technology disruption that we're facing, but as well how to take this to society and how to create narratives and better solutions. It's very focused and as well an international speaker on the areas of innovation and the future of work. And as the co-founder of the Atari Token project, he worked in terms of one of the biggest gaming platforms in the world and creating a new kind of direction within the context of blockchain technology, tokenization, and tokenomics. In terms of his bio, besides a career in global derivatives and technology in London and New York, he has been behind serious companies. He's as well a veteran and has been working with the likes of veterans in gaming, technology, and as well in blockchain, where he worked with, for instance, some of the Ethereum founders, and working specifically, I think, is one of the areas of expertise in blockchain technology and the areas of frontier technologies. But he's been as well always looking at thinking and taking in actions and as well questioning what is going on around ourselves. And I think that's the part that I'm excited to talk today, and looking forward as well on this. And as well, I think we're going to touch that is really, he finished writing a very, I would say, I'm actually looking forward to read it, but a fantastic book about how to look at all these different things that we've been talking in this series, but as well that are critical for our world and our society. So welcome to our series, Daniel. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Dinis. What a great introduction. Thank you.
Oh, pleasure. I think there's much more, but we're going to touch that. So Daniel, so I think you have quite a unique background, both from a family and cultural background, but as well between the UK and as a citizen of the UK and the world. So can you tell us about this background, your education, as well a bit of a cultural background? I think in your case it's particularly important because you touch a lot of different cultural roots and different things that are really interesting. And I like always to look at the basis and the cultural basis of the people.
Thanks, Dinis. So yes, I'm a second generation Brit. My father and mother both came to the UK. My father is a refugee. He was a Jewish 4-year-old living in Vienna. Came to the UK, fled to the UK just before the war. And apart from his parents, my grandparents, his family were all disappeared. And my mother, on the other hand, was a German, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan German, not Jewish at all, came to the UK after university. So completely polar opposites, you could say. Met my father at a party and loved the UK. Actually, she decided to stay here. She loved the UK more than she did Germany. And they married, and my mother converted. So, yes, I think I have a reasonably interesting background. I mean, that's one of the reasons I like the UK so much. I've lived in a lot of places, as you said. I've worked in a lot of places. I've had global businesses, and I'm a massive fan of the UK. The people here, what they generally do, the way they're very tolerant of people, and the way they generally like quiet success. And that is something I aspire to do, and it's one of the reasons why I've always worked really hard to try and do the best I can for the UK. It's why, as you said, I used to advise the European commissioners. I did that as an honorary role for 5 years because I felt, as the UK was a player in the EU, it was most important to make the best of the EU, and also I then advised the British government on how to deal with the EU because I was inside it, and I wanted to allow the UK to take advantage of it. Educationally, I went to an extremely good public school from 13 to 18. Was not a very good academic at all. I worked very hard when I was pushed if it was something I didn't want to do. So my school life, whilst I had the benefit of a great education, I didn't take as much advantage of it as I should. And I went to university, studied electronic engineering, another course I should probably have avoided. And when I graduated, which I just did, one of my tutors said to me, "We tried to draw the line above you." And the other one said, "For God's sake, don't become an electronic engineer." So that was sort of my background. And I ended up in, as you say, in derivative trading tech in the early 90s after that.
Well, that's an impressive background. I want to touch. I think I have a couple of generations as well, some Jewish blood from my father's side, but I think one of the things I would like to really touch is that how that marked, because your father, well, it's quite impressive that lost his family and they came quite young as well to UK, and as well having a mother German. So I would like to understand. Of course, this was post Second World War, but it's kind of an interesting. I want to touch that part. Did that mark you in terms of seeing the world in one end as one extreme to the other? Because you cannot have more two extremes that probably in your family. Of course, one thing if it's post Second World War, but still, I would like to see how that had any kind of relation in terms of who you are, the way you look at the world, and as well this cultural, I would say, mixes, because that's a very strong cultural mix, to say less.
Look, it's really difficult to answer this scientifically because I don't have anyone else that I can say, well, they had something slightly different than I'm born, how I was born. I was incredibly lucky, as you say, my father survived the war, and he was very lucky too. He was incredibly successful, came to the UK with nothing. His father was interned in the Isle of Wight as an enemy agent, and he was brought up by his mother, who had no food. He literally had no food to eat. He was an incredibly intelligent person, also incredibly academic. Got a scholarship to Cambridge, a double first. Was offered the head of Shell Japan in his 20s, and then made a lot of money in his 40s in Persia, working, funnily enough, with a Persian. So his best friend and business partner was a Persian. And retired when he was late 40s and went back to what he really loved, which is academics. He loved maths, he loved science, and he spent the next 30 years just reading and reading and reading. My mother, German, very beautiful German, blonde hair, blue-eyed, also traveled the world with her job, set up her own company, was very successful at it. You know, when my father was starting his own business, that paid for our house, paid for everything that we had. So, my brother and sister are much more intelligent than me, So I've got to say, I had an incredibly good upbringing, incredibly supportive parents, quite demanding parents, but not pushy parents. Both died relatively young, in their 70s. But I feel very, very lucky to be where I am and to have that sort of opportunity. The only point I could say on, the concern, it was clearly tough for my father's family for him to marry a German. It was actually more tough for my German family, who I knew much better because my father's family died young, and there weren't many of them, there were just two. My mother's family was much more concerned that she was going to have Jewish kids, and not because they had an issue with Jews, but because they'd seen what happened in the Second World War, and they were worried that it might happen again. So, and I did spend a lot of summers with that side of my family. But again, I can't say I had anything but an incredibly lucky upbringing.
Well, that's a beautiful story, I think. I know that you have a lot of fantastic stories on your upbringing, but it's beautiful as well how your parents, on the middle of these changes and as well, especially differences, made a family and a home. Let's put it that way. It's really impressive. So I want to start with when it comes to your career. So you start in trading and in the city, and then you went to entrepreneurial and to gaming. So can you tell us a bit, because at the time, of course, London was still #1 at the time. It's still right now, but now it's a bit more blurred because technology and trading and everything are much more mixed than the city and the financial world. But at the time, of course, the financial world of London was unique in the planet and very kind of less technological than it is now, much more in terms of networks and banking and regulation and so forth. But as well, the trading part, probably I'm sure that you went through all the changes that came with the evolution of trading, and as well from kind of much more network-based ecosystem to become much more technology-based and much more global. So I would like to touch that because you went through that, and I'm sure that it probably changed as well who you are as an entrepreneur.
Well, yes. I went into derivative trading technology in the early 90s. So rather than being a trader, I was building the tech. Derivative trading was very new. We were talking about swaps and options and swaptions back then. So it was very much based on Black-Scholes and the technology at the time. I had a reasonably good career in it. It was very dynamic. And, I was lucky enough to be in disruptive tech. From my first job was, rebuilding the financial systems using derivatives. And at the beginning, I loved derivatives. Derivatives allowed companies to do incredible things that they couldn't do before, manage their cash flows, convert cash to different currencies received at different times. I wrote a technology for one of the big oil companies that would manage the way that they manage their money versus just putting it on various indices, and revaluing it, etc. So these technologies had real value. And I then ended up in New York. Again, very lucky story. I won't tell you the story, but it's quite an interesting story how I ended up with a job in New York. And again, because the UK was so advanced in derivative trading that the bank in New York that I ended up working for was using technology built in the UK with no expertise in the US. And I happened to be had worked previously at one of the companies they use the technology of. And then they did something very interesting, that bank. They used technology to prevent the bank being shut down by the banking committee. And I fell into the role of managing that process. So I spent 2 years on change, trying to get a 1,600-man bank, big global bank, 1,600 people in the US, half of whom reported into Europe, and a quarter of whom reported into Asia, and only a quarter into the US. So it was, you can imagine the status of it. And it really taught me about change, and how difficult it is to get people to change, even when their jobs and their entire company depends on it. But it was also a fascinating time for me. I came back to the UK in the late 90s. And I was looking around for something to do, and I sort of fell into the digital rights management field just when it's new. And I looked at it from an outside view. I said, you know, at the moment, the big players, the big game players, the big software companies, they protect their disk, but actually the disk has no value. What really has value is the license key. So the company I created reversed the whole digital rights management chain. We said, you might as well let your disk go out free, but you need to control the license key. And we were working with companies in South Africa, so we were using dial-up modems, and we had to work out a way we could protect content in 20 seconds on a dial-up modem. So the license key became very useful. It was, I almost joke, it was like Bitcoin. We could trade $5,000 around in 14 seconds over the world with these keys. And that was a revolutionary technology for companies. So all the big software companies from Microsoft, Adobe, Symantec used it. Then the big movie studios used it. Then the music players used it. The gaming companies moved from disks to activation keys because of it. So it was a really interesting period for me. So the UK was a great place to do that as well. It's sort of central to the world. We speak English, etc. So it was a really good opportunity. And I ran that business till around 2012, from the late 90s, and it became very, very big. That was really my first, view into the gaming world, because I was working with all the big gaming companies. But I would never call myself a game developer. I mean, I understood the gaming field, but the actual game development side of it, the Atari Token was game development, but I wouldn't, I was very clear that I'm not the game expert, but I am someone that understands the gaming ecosystem.
That's really impressive. And so I want to touch from your experience, both from the trading to the IP and all the considerations in terms of probably the first considerations around IP digital. So from that part, and I know that you are as well an expert in these areas, how do you see the evolution? Because that's interesting, especially when it comes to trade and finance, and as well applying this, because at the moment, the lines are blurring between the financial world, the technology world, and the IP world. Because at the moment, a company of technology and the company of finance are all, for instance, if you have Square that is created by a Twitter founder, and if you have even Revolut, they are created by technology people, not by trading people or investment people. Actually, most of these companies are really actually being created on that. So I want to touch that because, of course, you have quite a lot of experience over there. And as well, what you mentioned about the restructure of the bank and the restructure of the financial organization.
I think the really simple answer to that is everybody's a tech company eventually now. Like all science used to be maths if you get far enough into it. That was what I was taught at school. You can study biology, chemistry, physics, and maths. You probably even do it at university, but by the time you get post-grad, it all just becomes maths. And I think that's probably the same with the way the world's going. You can have an oil company, or you can have a cigarette company, or you can have a bank, or you can have a gaming company, but eventually it's a tech company. And eventually it's a data company. And as you said, you call it the fourth industrial revolution. I call it the cognitive revolution. We're moving to a knowledge economy. So it's all about the data you hold. It's all about how you serve your customers. It's all about how the technology best delivers a service to a company, to a consumer. And at the end, it's a finance company because you need to make money from it. And whether that's storing money in a bank account, which is now purely digital. I mean, 100 years ago, they had safes full of cash and gold. Now they just have bits and numbers, same as Amazon. It has bits and numbers. The fact that it delivers a parcel in a part of its business at the end doesn't really matter. In fact, I heard a great story about the reason that Amazon is such a big cloud company. It's because they had enormous data centers that were required mainly for Christmas, because their business was November the 15th to January the 15th. And for 10 months a year, they had these servers that weren't doing anything. So they became a cloud company. Now, that just shows, they're a technology company and they're applying their technology to whoever wants it. And so I think, yes, I mean, there's some phenomenal things that are going on in the world today, you know, decentralization, which is very great and also very scary. That, you know, the entire revolution of the financial industry, not necessarily with crypto, but the whole computerization of it, the data analysis that we can run on people, you know, Google knows what you want to search before you search it, you know, so it's, you know, these systems are becoming very, very powerful. So, but everything eventually is a fintech company, is eventually everything is a technology company, I would argue.
I'm completely with you 100%. So I want to touch then from this New York career, how did you end up with the Atari Token project? First, let's start with that one, because I know that this project is quite revolutionary in a lot of areas. It still is, but a bit how that it came. And of course, I know that there are parts that might private, but at least what you can say in terms of public and in terms of the inception.
Well, yeah, again, a very great question. And it's an interesting sort of segue, but it's not quite a single step. It's a multiple step process. So when I was, as you mentioned, when I advised the EU and the UK government, my main interests were education and future of work. You know, I would tell the EU constantly, we got to look to the future. We got to look at how we've got to educate people. You know, a commodity-based protectionist state doesn't work. And it certainly won't work in 2040. You know, you've got to move to technology. And fortunately, you mentioned Eric. Eric, fortunately, working for David Cameron, started moving the UK very fast towards a technology economy. And we've got to thank that sort of initiative for where we are today. But Europe, I don't think, has moved that way. So that's the first thing. Future of work and education, I've been thinking about since 2005, 2006. Then you know, in the mid 2000 or like 2010, 2011, I started co-founding a lot of businesses with people that wanted to work with me, always in disruption. And then the natural move for me was to start investing in startups, which I did in 2014 and 2015, you know, very early stage companies. And it was through that I learned about the blockchain. One of the people I used to invest with, a guy called Barry, great guy, was a very senior guy at IBM. And he taught me about the blockchain on a tube ride home after we had invested in the company. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, you've got to teach me about this. So I went into IBM's offices sort of mid 2016. And I said, I want to lecture on. He gave me a 4-hour lecture on blockchain, on Ethereum, on Hyperledger, where it was, what it did. And I just was going, this is going to change the world. This is really going to change the world. And so I went back to him a few weeks later. I said, look, you know, we really have to take advantage of this paradigm shift in the world. I sort of missed the internet revolution in late 90s. You know, I was working on, you know, DRM, but it was cool, but it was very much traditional based we had traditional solutions, whereas what made it so valuable eventually was the digital solutions. And I said to him, we've got to do something with this. We've got to do it. And we came up with this model that we called, everything had a funky name in 2016, we called blockchain smokers, mainly because my daughter liked chain smokers and it sort of ran off the tongue, and we just needed a name at a minute to go to an event. And we had this thesis about how you create very good disruptive tech. And the concept was you would take people that were domain specialists with innovative technology, and you would introduce them, at the time it was only blockchain, to blockchain technologies. And we started looking at companies to invest in and to go through this model, and we found a few that we were going to create and move to this model. Anyway, in the beginning of 2017, being a very practical person, I said, okay, well, if I'm going to teach other companies to do it, I want to do it myself. So I went back to my first company, my license key company, and I took 4 people from it, 2 developers, the CTO, and one of the engineers. And I said to them, what I'd like you to do is build me some blockchain stuff. And they go, what? They go, I don't care, just build me something. So they spent a couple of months. I went back in the office, and they'd built on Hyperledger a way of exchanging license keys backwards and forwards in 2017. I said, oh, that's cool. but that's Hyperledger. Let's do it. I want you to do it on a decentral system. So 3 months later, it was about April, May, excuse me. In April, May, I said to them, can you, they completed it on Ethereum. And I thought, well, this is really cool. What are we going to do with it? So we started finding a use case, and we immediately went to the gaming industry and we said, this has enormous benefits to gaming. And we sort of geared up to do an ICO, not because we wanted to do an ICO, but because I wanted to see the process. This was about May 2017. At the same time, as luck would have it, I bumped into a very old friend of mine called Ron. Ron has been in gaming since 1990. He was one of the first people in the US to create the casual gaming industry. He was friendly with all the people from Epic, from DeepMind. They were all gamers together. And we happened to go for lunch. And he said, what's the coolest thing you're working on? I said, well, we're working on blockchain. We're working on these technologies for gaming. And he phoned me 2 weeks later and he said, this is going to revolutionize gaming. What you are doing, you've got it slightly wrong, but it will. So he came on board as the second co-founder of the Atari Token with all his gaming friends. And what they were doing is they were using the technology and the ideas we were creating and using it to embed it into an industry they knew really well. And they'd been predicting was going to go like this way anyway, but didn't have any idea of how it was going to go there. Then we went to Atari, or I went to Atari, because we wanted a very good brand name. And Atari came on board as the third co-founder. And then we wanted the most effective decentralized person we could find. And I started becoming friendly with Anthony Diorio from Ethereum, who really got not only decentralization, but gamification, future of work. This was everything he believed in. And he came on as the fourth founder, at which point I backed down from the project. Ron, who was the real visionary of the gaming, took over, and it became the Atari. It moved on from where we were. We were going to do an ICO. I was going to run that, but we felt that, well, we knew that an ICO was incompatible with the technology we were building. And eventually, after I left in the beginning of 2019. Atari actually took the project over again. It just became the token just became a side feature of Atari. Unfortunately, not building the phenomenal product that was available, but I think it was at the moment. But you're right, the product itself, the Atari Token, and the platform of it is a future of work project that was going to create a $20 trillion economy. So it was a phenomenal thing to do, and it will be built. It needs to be built, and Eric and I will be finding companies that can deliver that technology to the world.
Really impressive story, and I think really it shows as well your work of looking at technology and research parallel, which I like a lot, and it's quite unique as well, because a lot of these things are normally come up with from there's a concept of research and looking at innovation that is critical. So I want to go back to the work you did with the European Union and as well with the UK government. I know that it's probably not going so much on the politics, but especially when it comes to education and the level of technology, because one of the things that I learned as well, work with some governments and as well with the European Union as well, is the lack of digital preparation that countries have. So I know that gave you a lot of understanding of the complexities of both, of course, the European Union, it's 27 countries and a lot of challenges. With the UK, it's thanks to the work of Eric and the likes, of course, on the team and the other people, has been leapfrogging in terms of technology. And actually at the moment, I think from a tech city perspective, London is the #2 in the world, or 3, which is part thanks to Eric and all the work that was done on the foundations, and it's continuing right now going on. But I would like to hear, how was someone that knew about technology, about international trade, and really then go to the European Commission that at the time, I'm sure it was much less advanced in terms of digital than is now. And as well, I'm sure there will be a lot of some stories you can share, but of course, whatever you can share public.
Well, the way I got involved in the European Commission actually was in the early 2000s, the European Parliament deemed that patents should not be protectable in Europe, across the whole of Europe. And they were well on the way to actually making them. I got involved actually through Microsoft and eBay. I never quite found out how they found out about me, but they asked me to get involved in this debate, and I started going to Europe a lot and discussing with a lot of the players there, the commissioners, the parliamentarians, the big businesses, the patent skeptics, why patents were valuable. And it was one of the most heated areas, I think, ever in European the EU history. I mean, people were floating boats down the rivers with pirate ships, and it was a very, very heated time. And because of that, I was then asked to join a group of business leaders. There were 2 from every member state, called the Enterprise Policy Group. They just started it. I was in that for 4 years. You did a 2-year term and then another 2. And then once you met, I think, once every 2 weeks or once a month. And then one of the meetings was with 2 people of the political class. So 2 parliamentarians or 2 bureaucrats from each country as well. So we met, we discussed a lot of things. On the whole, I found it interesting, but Britain, the UK firstly, it was further advanced than most other countries in what we were discussing. So it was very much for them to catch up. But secondly, I don't think they really listened that much to what we said. The value to me was actually the people I met, because I was doing that work, and, you know, the influence we could create that way. And the other big side effect for me was the British government found my experience of the European Commission very valuable for their negotiations and discussions, and I was allowed to meet with them and talk to them about it. When I went to Europe, I was supposed to be completely unbiased, and I wasn't supposed to be national. Funnily enough, I was with the chairman of Rolls-Royce. He and I were the 2 British constituents. We came in blind. Most of the other countries, their representatives came in with stacks of paper that were given to them by their governments of what they were supposed to say. It was quite an interesting period. But I mean, it did lead to the fact that after the financial crash, I was part of a very big team. I think it was the head. I mean, it was a very fascinating meeting I went to. I went to a meeting with, you know, Richard Branson and Lakshmi Mittal and the head of every major French corporation, with Brown, Barroso, and which president was it of France? Sarkozy. And that was a really interesting event. There were about 50 of us, and that broke out into many areas. I ended up writing the innovation, or writing, it's a bit grandiose. I was a big part of writing the 2012 innovation report for the British government that came out of those meetings. But the whole experience made me not an enormous fan of the Commission and the European Union. You know, this is very personal, but I felt it is a fantastic idea badly implemented, and anything badly implemented doesn't work. And I really hoped that when Britain started its entire Brexit discussions, not the vote itself, there would be some movement to make it more appropriate, but I just felt it didn't. And, you know, whilst Brexit to me is an enormous shock, you know, I live in a world where you've got to play with the hand you've been given. And, you know, it doesn't matter whether we're in Europe or out of Europe, we have to do the best we can. And I think Britain would have done well in the EU, and I think it will do very well outside the EU if we believe in ourselves.
It's all about that. So I want to come back to the level of education and especially the challenge that you saw, how countries not go into the politics, but the nuances of lack of knowledge and digital preparation. Because what I've been finding is really, of course, you mentioned Europe and UK, which are some of the most advanced economies in the planet, or the most advanced economies in the planet, and the most democratic as well. Because if you get out of this stage, we have the US, and then it starts becoming very blurred. So when it comes to education, and especially the lack of knowledge, as someone that is a technologist, an entrepreneur, and someone as well that thinks about ideas and about it, as well as an investor as well, how do you see this? Because I think this is where it becomes very challenging the next 10 to 20 years of humanity, because this can go very wrong. Because if the countries are not taking serious the technology, what is going to happen is that, of course, the big corporations will, and they will take care of they are already taking care of our data, about our financials, but as well can become much more disruptive, because a person like, well, I'm not going to mention, but a couple of billionaires from Silicon Valley can actually literally buy a country and do whatever they want with their data. And as well, let's say, coming back to Germany, and I will be a bit radical here, is that IBM, which of course now it's much more positive, was creating machines for the Nazis to kill precisely, well, probably some of your family or relatives. So the challenge here is really that the scale of this right now is thousands of times bigger and faster as well. So I want to see how you do this, how you look at this purely from a country perspective and from a technology perspective, and as well the blurring. It's a big question, but I know that you're a big picture guy.
Oh, this is an enormous question. This is such a big question. In fact, you mentioned the book, and I've written this very early draft. To call it a book, I think, is misnaming it. It's a thought piece at the moment that needs to be turned into a book. But it really goes to the heart of that. And you know, there are so many areas that the world, as it moves to a knowledge economy, is potentially going wrong. The first of which is, what's an expert? You know, you call me an expert, and I always say I'm not an expert, though I do think deeply about things. You know, influencers on Instagram now, because they're a model or a film star, have more influence when they say something that should be left to an expert than an expert. You know, it's the amount of misinformation, not because people are trying to manipulate people, but because people just don't know, but that's who they listen to. You know, we have an army of influencers who are more powerful than governments. We have a blurring between journalism and reporting. So a journalist now seems to be an expert on the subject that they're reporting about. In fact, I was having a debate on Twitter with someone today who was an old school friend of mine. He was arguing that an opinion piece about the data meant that the data was invalid. But, you know, that's not right. The data is inviolable. The analysis, you know, a fact-checking website on British government data is not inviolable. And people are falling for this. You know, then you have the co-founder of Wikipedia who cautioned against using Wikipedia now for a lot of areas because it's been taken over by activists, and this is supposed to be a source of information. So we are blurring the lines about where do we get knowledge from? And that is quite dangerous. Well, that's incredibly dangerous. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you mentioned a couple of billionaires in Silicon Valley. I don't worry about them particularly, because when I was at the EU, one of the biggest, I'm not going to name them, but it's completely obvious who they were, one of the biggest tech company, in fact, the biggest tech company at the time, was being sued and investigated for antitrust by the European Commission and the American government. And they were defenseless against regulation and what they were doing to them. And the founders had to spend years dealing with this, and they were no longer the biggest tech company in the world afterwards, you know, because regulators can wield way more power than corporations. The problem is, it's not the leaders of these companies that are controlling the message. It's the technology that they've developed. You know, I don't know, you know, Google does 100,000 searches a second. I think if you took every Google employee and said to them, you find the answers to that, in a century, they wouldn't have found the answers to the first second. They've developed technology that is finding the answers for them. And I can promise you, I'm pretty sure that if you typed the same search as me in Google or any of these platforms, not only would it come up with a different answer for you and me, it would also suggest a different answer for you and me as you're typing it. So we've allowed technology for our benefit, which is to find things quickly, because I might type in socks and it knows I want running socks, whereas you type in socks and it knows you want skiing socks, because that's what it knows about us. That's very helpful. Thank you. But it's also saying when I type in what is the vaccine efficacy, it's giving me one piece of data and it's giving you another piece of data. You know, so we immediately can't even have a conversation about something anymore, which means that we're getting into these echo chamber mentalities. And this is where I worry. I worry that we're allowing people to develop these technologies without any oversight. And it's not the leaders anymore of those companies, because they're not building the technology, it's the other people. You know, Mark Zuckerberg didn't build behavioral science into Facebook. If you watch The Social Dilemma, it was a bunch of other people that were working for him that built it. He probably didn't even know what they were building. I mean, he knew they were building behavior. He didn't know what the rules were because he's not looking at everything. And this is now being propagated. And then you get into this really weird subject, which is you look at let's say the three laws of robotics by Isaac Asimov, which are still used. You know, a robot will never harm a human, a robot will never allow a human to come to harm, and a robot will never allow itself to come to harm. But then there's a zeroth law that was coming afterwards, which was a robot will never allow humanity to come to harm. But what's humanity? If you and I debate what humanity is, and we come from relatively similar backgrounds, we won't have an answer. If I let President Z and Joe Biden explain what humanity is, they're going to have different answers. You know, if you let, you know, anybody anywhere in the world define what is humanity, you get a different thing. So the technologies that we're creating are based on their creators. And we can see the internet already has a Californian feel. It still does. From 30 years ago, when it started in Silicon Valley, you know, whoever creates the frontier technology, the cognitive revolution systems, you know, in 100 years or 50 years, it's going to have their flavor to it. Now, then we get onto the whole idea of what happens when technologies become smarter than us. You know, Eric likes this statement I have in my book, which is, in the 4 billion years that life has been on Earth, never has a dominant species attempted to create a species that's more powerful than itself. You know, and you know, if you look at what Elon Musk is doing, and you look at what Mark Zuckerberg's doing, and you look at what the President X's doing, they're doing absolutely that. They're attempting to create a superior intellect. Now, whether they get there or not, I think they will. But whether they get there or not, these things are going to be deciding our future based on the morals and mores of their creators. And these things become very important. And, you know, just to finish off on this prediction thing, you know, if you look at what's happened during the COVID era and the last year and a half, and you look at what we know about the British government has a unit called the Behavioural Science Unit, also known as the Nudge Unit, and the way that they've been persuading people to do things that they think are in the best interest of society, using formidable behavioural science technology and using technology to ensure that we do it. Eventually, that starts predicting the future by making sure that people, as Asimov wrote in the Foundation book, if you have enough people, you can predict the future. But you can also influence the future if you've got the technology that ensures that people move in the way that you want. You know, and again, the only players that can do that are the computers, because nobody, you know, we don't have enough people to do the processing for that, but the computers can do it in a second. And every time they learn, they get rewarded. So, you know, the ones, and I don't mean rewarded like we do with chocolate or money, but they get rewarded because those are the technologies that are then used again and again and again. And the ones that don't deliver get turned off. So, you know, eventually we have solutions that are enacting the desires of their creators. And that's totally scary.
Yeah, I like the way you went to the linearity, because a lot of these things, when you talk about these things, there's a tentative to put everything in a box, and as well the box is, there's the bad guys there, there's the good guys, and in the middle everything is blurred. And I think really the challenge right now is how we look at this. So that brings me, I have a lot of questions on this, but I want to touch first about EdenBase. And I interviewed previously Eric, so I think people listening to us can and should listen to Eric if you didn't do it so until now, because it's a great interview as well. And Eric speaks for itself, not for me. I think you, in the case Daniel, so creating EdenBase for me is actually quite impressive what you guys are trying to do. I would like for people that don't know about EdenBase, if you could explain what is the vision and why you came out with the idea of EdenBase with Eric and the team that you're building worldwide.
Okay, yeah, this comes out of everything that I've been thinking about for a long time, and it's to do with the way I see the world. And you know, I have to declare I see the world. You asked me at the beginning, what am I like and how have I got here? And clearly everything that I do is based on, I've had experience at least of working for the commission and people and the government where I've had to try and dissociate myself from who I am and what I am, but I am who I am. But the concept of EdenBase is to take the future that we think is positive for people, and to ensure that we deploy into the solutions and the teams that we work with these solutions in a way that is in those targets and meets those goals. So I look at ESG as not a company that comes to us and says, hey, I'm an ESG company because I'm going to do great things. You know, we looked at Facebook in 2004 and thought by 2010 the whole world would be democracy, and actually we wake up in 2021 and go, did we really want to have Facebook in the world anymore? Because just because we think that something is going to be ESG doesn't mean that it turns out that way. So we have this very circular system where we invest in teams, help them grow, help them deploy frontier technologies, but also try and assess them as ourselves and say, are they delivering on what they say? So ESG to me is, are you improving the world by what you're doing? So to me, ESG could be taking oil and making, and reducing 3% of the emissions from oil. That's an ESG, because we do need oil at the moment. It's not as radical as saying, well, we're going to have an oil-free world, because having an oil-free world might create more problems than we currently have if we don't do it in the correct way. So the way that we do that is we find teams that really understand their industries, and we challenge them to say, but in 10 years' time, if you do not use these technologies, you probably won't exist. And the industries that you're in probably won't exist because of productivity gains. In the real world, we need enormous productivity gains. And when we get enormous productivity gains, then everybody has to compete with that. Otherwise, they don't exist. So we feel, and we strongly feel that these frontier technologies are going to deliver these productivity gains. So we challenge our teams to say, if you added these technologies, what could your technology become? And we work with them through this process. It might be 1 month, it might be 6 months, it might be a year, until we come up with a strategy and a thesis that's implementable by them with our support to deliver on that goal. And then we invite them into our ecosystem. We're a strong believer in orchestrated serendipity. We're a strong believer of people when they're in a creative mode, connecting with other people, having chance encounters, listening to random conversations, to innovate as fast and as best they can. We bring them all together into our EdenBase hub, and we're looking for it now. The first one will be 100,000 square feet with 2,000 people to all work together, delivering a phenomenal frontier technology solution. And the book is really our thesis behind this. It's saying why we're doing it, what we've got to look out for, but also we're turning it into a mind map of where we'd like to go. And every time we invest in a company, it goes on our mind map. And every time that company delivers a product, it also goes on our mind map, and we can see how that impacts where we think the world should be. And then we take positive or negative action depending on what happens to make sure that we get back on that line. And it really goes back to this fact, or to the fact, it's not a fact, this theorem I have that there are 4 types of frontier technologies if they become sentient. And then 3 of them aren't that good for us. You know, the first is the Terminator one, that they decide they don't really like us and they want to wipe us out. You know, that doomsday scenario. But the second is that they don't really care for us at all, and they believe that the Earth would be better off 40 degrees hotter or 20 degrees colder, and so they work towards that and they eliminate us as something of no concern. And the third way is that they really care for us, but that has 2 sides to it. Really caring for us might mean something like the Matrix, where they think we're best off lying in a vat, you know, being fed nice hallucinogens and living our lives in a state of bliss, or that they support us and make us good. So, you know, dominant technologies and dominant species need to be created to benefit a lot of people, and therefore we are not only creating this ecosystem like that, we're also creating a porous ecosystem where we expect, and we will be inviting educators, we'll be inviting lawmakers, we will be inviting, you know, school children, we will be inviting everybody that we can to come and interface with us. We will be having enormous apprentice schemes to make sure that people are represented and can work with these people, with these technologies, because that is the way that we feel we're most likely to come up with a positive result. And it goes back to the fact, I think, that disruption is random. And we want to try and make it less random. We want to try and make it more defined and less problematic if it happens to go wrong.
Yeah, that's very ambitious, and I would say that I want to ask one question that I think I touched that, but I would like to in an offline conversation with you and Eric. But if I look at companies that are trying to do this, especially in the VC world or the investment world, there are very few. There's a lot of companies trying accelerators and incubators, but especially with this angle of thought leadership and strategy, I would say probably Anderson Horowitz, A16Z, which is probably one of the leading ones, and actually probably that they actually keep a very strong thought leadership and a very strong sense of doing, and a very strong as well activity. Actually, for instance, the lobby they're doing in blockchain in the US and crypto is quite impressive, but at the same time they do it always within the education purpose. There's always the podcast, there's the books and so forth. So is this something the direction you guys are trying to do? Because I think on the top of that, both you and Eric have a sense of policies of working with governments. In the case of Eric, of course, creating one of the most important things in the last decades in the UK, or probably 100 years, because this changed the economy of the UK from a financial-driven company to economy to a technology-driven economy. And in your case, of course, with both your financial, but as well work with countries, and as well you saw that as well, how challenging it is when the governments don't understand that. So your goal here as well is that this education, the future of work, and putting this in the company. But I know that you're very careful about the way you choose the companies, and as well the way you nurture the growth of the company. So can you tell us about this and how you align this if you compare with the A16Z and as well EdenBase and of course other things you might have on the pipeline?
Firstly, let me say how flattering it is to be even put in the same sentence as A16Z. You know that, you know, for a start. But secondly, I think
just one interaction on that. But come on, you guys created the UK, a lot of the UK guidelines. So in the end of the day, you are already probably bigger in a lot of ways. So I'm just saying from it's sometimes it's about what I like about Silicon Valley is they think big and they execute big. And I think in the end of the day is the way we look at this. But well, sorry. I don't want to interrupt, but I think effectively it's your credit for sure.
Well, thank you. I'm flattered. But we, you know, the thing that A16Z is, I would call them A16Z, but the thing that they do that's phenomenal is they do follow a thesis, and they have thought leaders, and it's nice to be thought of, Eric and I, as thought leaders, and I think we are. But When you get to the stage that they're at, the capital they're deploying into companies is enormous. It's not effective for them to do early stage VC. You know, they need to raise $1 billion fund to allow the 20% rule to work, because on a $50 million fund or $100 million fund, 2% is does not allow you to actually affect much change, because your team is too small to be able to do anything. The other thing about the 220 rule is the 2% is actually quite irritating for investors, in my opinion. As an investor in funds, you know, 20% fine, you made a lot of money from me, fine. But the 2% is just for just managing my money, you know, and just having it in your bank account. So the thing that we have innovated in this model, and I'm not saying we're unique, I haven't seen anybody else doing it, but you know, there may well be, is that we have tied the ecosystem part to tech services to a fund. And by doing that, the ecosystem part, because everybody needs an office to work in, unless we think we're going to be or work from home, which I don't aspire to, especially for this type of company, they need an office. So we provide the office, we provide that level 39 that Eric created before, which is the best place to be for a tech company, would be in level 39. We provide the tech services, and that's a profit center. So as soon as you've created a profit center that underpins your fund, you don't need your 2%. But secondly, you're able to employ a very large team that is able to affect change. And the reason I'm so keen on this model is we are finding really early stage companies. We're finding companies valued anywhere between $2 million and $12 million. A16Z don't invest less than, I don't know, $12 million. You know, we're finding companies that are really early stage. We're finding companies from all over the world. You know, we have companies, 2 companies coming in from Turkey, 1 from Germany already. As soon as we can host them here and travel is a bit easier. One of them came over already and went in a quarantine hotel, one of the Turkish companies, to come into our lab. We have 1 from Hong Kong who's moved over with his 6-year-old daughter. They stayed for 10 days in a quarantine hotel, he and his 6-year-old daughter, to come and work in our ecosystem because of how attractive it is to be with other people creating great tech, which means we're much wider in the number of companies we can deploy into, and how wide the backgrounds of those people can be. And I think that's a really powerful thing. We also have, not only do we invest in a lot of companies, we also have a program where companies that are too early for us, or we don't quite get, they can still come and work in our lab. And we even give them free desks in return for something, either equity in the company or an option on the company. So we can really be really wide with our net to see what companies are going to be great. I mean, we don't mind investing in a company with 4 or 5 people. You know, we ideally like a product, we like some customers, and we like the fact they've got a small team. We prefer not one-man bands or pre-product companies, but eventually we'll get there. So I think that's the real difference between us and one of these A16Zs. And there's, if they were our follow-on funds, that would be fantastic. We would love to be a channel partner for them, into that. But as you might know, we've 4 of the companies that we're looking at, Amazon Alexa in the UK are also looking at to invest in, but again, very early stage companies. And these are the things that we do. We've recommend, Amazon came to us and said, do you have any companies that would fit the Amazon Alexa model and would be good, well integrated into them? And we provided 4 companies to them that I think they're very much like 3. So again, very early stage. And that's where the disruption really comes from. If you can take out the randomness of it and make sure that these companies are more likely to deliver.
Yeah, I love the vision, and I think you're going to be very successful if you focus on that. And I think definitely is key as well, because you need this. I think Europe has been laying behind because of not being bold enough, but as well not to create structures and as well paths. And I think that's what I think both you and Daniel and Eric have a fantastic capacity to create that structure, and as well the narrative, because the narrative is almost sometimes as important as the rest, because if the narrative gets well and you get it, is the way you sell it, the way you scale it. So I don't know if you want to highlight some of the companies you've been investing or not. I know that you guys did recently, of course, just top level. I would like to touch that, and then I would like to go to other big picture questions.
Okay, so we've invested in 2 companies so far. We've got offers on the table with 2 more who won our competition. So to launch our hub, we ran a competition. We got over 120 entries from, I think, 25 countries in the world. We had some phenomenal judges. The guy that taught me about blockchain, Barry from ex-IBM, you know, Bill Tai, Anish Mohammed, who advises Ethereum and Ripple on scalability, yourself, you know, some really very strong experts in technology, in tech for good, in investing. And we got them down to 12. We were aiming for 10 companies. We got them down to 12. There were some really good ones. And then we were going to invest in 2. We're just about to invest in 2. So difficult to say who they are because we haven't signed the paperwork. But we like them so much, we also offered 2 other companies who are much earlier stage, both with women CEOs, which we really like, who are coming into our hub in probably September when it becomes easier. And we will help them grow, and then we will invest in them when we've seen they become big and at that stage where we can invest in. So the results are very good. In terms of the investments we made, the first investment we made was into a phenomenal new fund called Sangha. Sangha is a tech for good fund. And the reason we did that is they provide a very good network of deal flow into us. They're 2 principals, a woman called Carolina and Bill Tai, are partners of ours and part of our expert set. So it made a lot of sense. The other one we've done is an Australian company that we went in with Bill Tai on, and they use AI to review sports footage, you know, matches, and then they can determine the best clips from those, which is a phenomenal tech. In terms of the other 2 that we're investing in, who I be a bit careful of, one is a company that works with all the big brands, the luxury brands, from Louis Vuitton to Gucci to Fendi, and they do an amazing technology that brings their technology to life online, and also has a very big NFT play. Very cool company. And the other one we've invested in, Eric says that their bold picture is they will save the UK having to build nuclear power plants. And they've cracked a technology that allows developments and big buildings to monitor their electricity usage, and they can save somewhere between 15 and 25% of the electricity deployed, which in the UK's case means we probably don't have to build as many or any nuclear power plants. So really cool companies. The other 2 that we're looking at that we will move into a hub and we will invest in later, one does, it can analyze how you move through a website and determine whether you're likely to buy things, what things you've missed. They see something like a 50% increase on or decrease on basket abandonment. But the reason we love them so much is their potential for education. If they can start understanding how you operate online, they can start understanding how you learn things. And so we can very much tailor education systems for them. So they've got enormous potential. And the other one is contract management. And obviously the world lives on contract. We see a world of decentralized contracts, of digital contracts, of smart contracts, and these guys are a stepping stone into that world. So those are the 6 companies.
So Daniel, so I want to touch right now in terms of the work you've been doing, and I know that you don't call it book, but I know that I'm sure it's a fantastic research and preparation for the book that you've been working. So I want to go by, so when you talk about frontier technologies or fourth industrial revolution, there's still a lot of myth and a lot of, I would say a lot of noise, because at the moment, realistically, my experience, and we touched about governments and the lack of preparedness for this, but this is kind of general. In the universities, it's probably even worse. And this shouldn't be, of course, not all the universities are on the same level, or even departments, because you cannot put everything in the same box. But I would like to see, especially, how you see the context of the frontier technologies that you guys have been choosing, and as well, frontier technologies versus some of the ideas that are important for you when it comes to this, especially when it comes to innovation 360 and education, because I think these are very dear areas for me as well.
Frontier technologies is a term that we use for technologies that are becoming general purpose now. So AI, blockchain, 3D printing, AR, VR, quantum we see more as horizontal. But these technologies have been talked about for a long time, but they are getting to the stage where normal developers and potentially very soon normal people can just start using them. GPT-3, very good example. That I've got early access to it. It allows people with some technical and development background to use them quite easily. Same with blockchain. We're getting to the stage where the solutions are becoming much more plug and play. Same with quantum. One of the quantum companies we work with went on to the NASDAQ last week, and they make plug and play, callable quantum as a service. So that's the definition of frontier technology we give. We also look at frontier technologies as those that are likely to have an incredible impact on the way that we live and the way that we work. And the reason is because they deliver enormous productivity gains. And there are two things about these that are, I think, really fascinating. The first is, in most industries now, the biggest cost is human. And in some industries, not only is it the biggest cost, it's the biggest thing that you need to manage. To give you a sort of flippant example, a 3D AR, VR controllable avatar is much easier to manage than a Hollywood star. You don't need to fly them around the world. You don't need to put up with their budgets. You don't need to put up with the issues of whatever they do. You turn it on, it's there. But more importantly, they can actually be all things to all people. So they can modify the look to an Asian audience or to a British audience or to an Indian audience really quickly. So that's a productivity gain. And therefore, eventually, those things win out. That's the first thing. The second thing is these frontier technologies, as they take away our jobs, they actually create new jobs. And most people would look at that as, well, what are the new jobs? Well, the new jobs are building the frontier technologies or going into, soft skills. Again, I see that as a temporary issue, or going into education. These technologies, if they get to the stage where they start replacing people, they will replace everybody. But where they, to me, they create phenomenal future is what they deliver, like in metaverses. So the beauty of the metaverse is we don't need productivity gains in the metaverse because it's not real life. It's made up worlds. I could decide that I love high density underwater worlds, and I could create myself as an architect in a high density underwater world, and I could be the best architect, and I could move into bigger and bigger games and get paid more and more money. And again, productivity gains don't need to take effect there. And if they do, if one of the worlds gets taken over by AI, I can just move to a world that isn't, where they exclude it. So, but these worlds are not available without these frontier technologies. So, and as I'm sure you know, because you read a lot, a lot of futurists believe that we're a sort of metaverse anyway, and the world is a metaverse of somebody else. funnily enough. I don't have a view, as it happens, but it doesn't seem to me inconsistent or consistent with most of the views that we have. So, are we going to be creating these frontier technology metaverses that allow us the future of work? And that's really exciting to me. And then I met someone a few years ago that was putting memory onto cells, biological cells, because it was lighter and easier to transport cells than hard drives. And then you think, maybe you could eventually have a Petri dish like this big with little cells on it, the computers, and they're running your metaverse for you. They don't even know that they're not. Well, they are real, but they don't know they've been created for that purpose. And this, to me, is where it becomes really interesting. And then you go on to the final step of this, which is what happens if something really radical, like local manufacturing or even nano factories, become globally deployed. And because they are nano factories, or because they're local manufacturers, they can create as many local manufacturing plants as they want. And so everybody has a local manufacturing plant. What then there's no need for capitalism, because you don't need to take advantage of natural resources and acquire natural resources, because anything you need can happen. And this is really what I start exploring in the book. I mean, a lot of this is 40, 50, 60, 100 years out, but some of it is very close by, a driverless cars or driverless boats, things like that start really changing the way that employment works. And when you have that, you have to really consider, how we move forward with that, and in what way society deals with it. And I guess I argue that we're the equivalent of 2004 with Facebook, but with these technologies that are exponentially more powerful. Let's not wake up in 2035 or 2040 and say, oh, I wish we hadn't got here. Let's start getting involved in the process.
Yeah, and I think that point synthesizes everything. Let's not wait 10 years and then let things go. So let me ask one question. I want to go for a big question, but I want to go before to NFTs. I know that you've been both in gaming and NFTs. You have a lot of experience. So how do you see the NFT revolution that is going on? Because I know that you have been involved in a couple of projects on this, and you have quite a few things on your strategy. So just a bit of top level, how you see the NFTs, because I think it's particularly interesting, especially in the short term, looking at the blockchain revolution, how NFTs are making a lot of things happening in the short term.
When I look at NFTs, at a very high level, I look at what's going on in NFTs. It's exactly the same as what happened in 2017 with ICOs. It was they had this thing called a token. People used it to raise money. It was a new way of raising money. People bought a lot of them. Some are more valuable today than they were. Most of them disappeared. But it gave a lot of attention to the blockchain. NFTs is a little similar. It's just a token. It happens to be a non-fungible token, so every token is different from another. So that's the first thing I think we've got to consider, that there is a massive hype bubble. The other thing about the tokenized industry, as I mentioned about the Atari token, we were preparing to do an ICO. We raised the biggest pre-private in history for an ICO, and then we decided not to go ahead with our ICO and it was a very sensible argument by the CEO, the second co-founder, which was, I can either build a product or we can run an ICO. Tokens and the type of products that we're building don't coexist. And so obviously we prefer to build a product. I think you've got a little bit of the same with the NFT. People haven't really thought about the value chain, the value proposition. The interesting thing about NFTs is in the current manifestation is there are a limited number of an unlimited number of things. So, the number of NFTs we can have can be absolutely enormous, and the rights and the underlying things and everything is, they can be built so quickly. So for the art market, because that's the one that's getting all the interest, all the papers were full of it a few months ago. You know, I think we have to move to a more traditional market, which is, you know, there are people that understand what are the valuable ones get promoted, etc., etc., etc. My interest in NFT is actually that it's a token and it has the value of a tokenized, a normal token, a non-NFT, a fungible tokenized asset, but that it is actually probably a better solution for a lot of products than the original tokens that people were using. And as you know, in 2017, NFTs were there and normal tokens were there, but everybody concentrated on normal tokens. I think the beauty, the values there. For EdenBase, we look at NFT as a horizontal. So we did the first ever digital twin where we matched a luxury fashion brand with an NFT token. We sold it through an exchange called Go NFT, and we sold it into the Chinese market, and it sold in seconds, and it was a great proof of concept. We see a massive value there. It's also a sort of environmentally or a more sustainable solution, which is if you can tie luxury fashion to an item on the blockchain, NFT is very suitable for that, then you can reduce counterfeit, which means there are less products in the market. You can encourage a more of a second-hand market, which means that there's less waste, etc. So we really like that. It also means that very small fashion houses can more easily validate their designs, and that's important. In the future, we see those for small fashion houses, they can, rather than license their creations to a big company that can then make as many as they want and just report, you could have manufacturing machines that are tied to a token, which means if you're given 5 tokens, you can create NFTs, you can create 5 units and no more. These are the end goals for that. And I think that is a really cool solution. But clearly NFTs have opportunities in contracts, they have metaverse, they're going to be enormous in, and I'm a massive fan of where I think NFTs are going. There's also a project we're looking at, it's very confidential at the moment. We're looking at a project where you can use NFTs in the fintech industry to very much revolutionize money raising and actually getting people to find sources of income in a completely new way. And it's something that actually came out of the Atari Token project as well.
Yeah, I completely subscribe all these areas, and I think really the wave is just started. I think the project, the NFTs, is probably the first really, I would say, mainstream of the digital twins revolution that we're going to have, and as well the metaverse that you touch as well. So I want to go to the bigger question probably that I have here today. And I want to touch that in multiple levels, but I would like to probably discuss, because of course it will take probably a couple of hours if you want to go, but today we are already passing 1 hour now, so we'll try to wrap up in a while and then probably do a second round if you are for that. So I think my question is around artificial intelligence and all the different areas, how it touches all the areas of society, especially the frontier technologies that we're talking about. So AI, we are still in kind of incipient AI, let's put it that way. We are still in the kind of the first stage, but it's already disrupting everything around us. And you touch, of course, the impact that data is having in our society, and especially the layers that it brings with it, that we are really only in the touching the skin. So the next 5, and I like what you said, is that we cannot wait for 2030 because that will be probably too late. So how do you see artificial intelligence in the scope of all the different things we're talking about? Because of course, the thing with artificial intelligence is that it goes through all the levels of society and is already there. But at the moment, what we have there is mostly the simply automation and some kind of algorithm, mathematical improvements and the automation to amplify that. But the next couple of years, things like singularity are going to take place, and part of that is already happening. And we're going to have a huge revolution. You mentioned financial services, gaming, Because in the end of the day, for instance, at the moment, we can understand how to make a society more productive, but we can as well erase part of society or putting gender bias or actually not even putting things will happen there, because of course we have different ways of programming and different ways of preparing things. But as well, if you are building AI in the UK, you have kind of ethical concerns, or Europe, that is not the same if you do it in Russia, or if you do it in China, or if you do it in Africa. And this all is happening as the same time as, like we discussed, that governments don't even get the basics. So what happening right now is much more accelerated. So I would like to see how you see this. And I know that you guys are working with a lot of companies that are touching this, and any company is a technology company, like you said, but I'm very kind of strong on this. And probably the last part is, okay, you have a chart of Star Wars, and Star Wars is a controlled AI, let's put it that way, because in the end of the day, although there's an emperor that is running and everything else is the Force, is still a spiritual concept. But then you have the narrative of Star Trek, the narrative of Terminator, the narrative of Blade Runner. So I would like to take this from a technological perspective and go to fiction and narratives.
Wow. Okay, I don't even know where to start. I think the first thing to start with is, I call this a cognitive revolution. I think that's really important. The industrial revolution seems to me to minimize what it actually is. You know, to me, the industrial revolution was started in 1780 in the UK, became big around the 1820s in Europe and then the US, and it was really about replacing and bettering physical elements of us and horses. And if you look at horses, in 1900 there were 20 million horses in the US. Now there's 1 million, because they just weren't needed anymore, you know. But we fortunately had cognitive ability. So all the jobs we were doing in the fields and in factories that were killing us early, we moved into office jobs, and, you know, even when we had manual labor, it was much safer because it had oversight. So that was a benefit to most of humanity, because we have a better life. But when we start replacing our cognitive ability, which is what I would argue we've got left, you know, and then there's subtext, well, our, you know, soft skills and our empathy and all these things, well, they can be programmed too, you know. It just takes longer. You know, these things are replacing the way that we think, and they do them better. So, for instance, you know, the Big Bang in the city, when computers took over, before that you had trading pits and people traded, and then trading pits disappeared because computers did it better, and I can trade at home instead of, you know, through 10 people and not get the trade I want, and it was filled with fraud, and, you know, it was a closed system that benefited the internal players. Now you've now got Robinhood and people like that. Anyone can set up an account and trade anything anywhere, or Coinbase or whatever. So these things replace those jobs. Then you had the auditing job. So people moved to traders on the floor. You know, in the 80s, every bank needed a trading floor the size of a football pitch. You go to a bank now, there's no such thing. You know, their buildings are all eliminated. And then they found new jobs, which were the, you know, back office staff, but they disappeared too, because computers do it better. And now you have the quants and the guys that look after the technology. But banks are a fraction of the size that they were compared to the money they look after. So while some people say, well, the number of employees has actually not fallen that much. Yes, but the size of the market in 1980 compared to today, it's like 1,000 times greater, or 10,000 times greater, you know, per dollar, or, you know, per unit. It's a computerized world. Then we talk about Google. What Google can do in a second, it would take a human 10,000 years. And we have this sort of weird, I think, definition of what's machine learning and what's artificial intelligence. Machine learning is what it's just done, and artificial intelligence is what it hasn't done. But actually what it's done, the machine learning part, is actually really enormous. And I have this example I used once, which is, even humble spreadsheet is a cognitive replacement tool. So if I was sitting here, running EdenBase or building EdenBase 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, I would have written, or maybe a little longer, but yeah, probably 25. I'd have written on a piece of paper, the model, and then we'd say, we're going to move into this building, and we got this, and then suddenly they said, you can't have that building anymore, you need another building. So we'd have to start from scratch, put in all the numbers, write them all down, go through the calculation, and 5 days later, we'd have an answer. Now, I just write my knowledge into a spreadsheet, and Eric comes to me. He doesn't even need to come to me. He's got the spreadsheet, but I wrote it, and he would, in that case, I'm better at spreadsheets than him, but it happens, and he can just put the new square footage and the new price and the new this and the new that, and in a millionth of a second, not only does it tell us whether we can afford it or not, it goes green or red, depending on whether we can afford it or not. So I've taken all my knowledge and stuck it in a spreadsheet that anybody else can use. And that seems really mundane, but actually, if we think about it hard, it's not mundane at all. It's quite powerful that a computer is now, and you say, well, it's just a dumb computer. Maybe, I don't know. A greater being might look at us and say we're a bit dumb for doing the things we do. But every step we take automatically, immediately afterwards, and this is if we go back to the beginning of the conversation, I lived in New York for a while. I lived on the 28th floor, 360-degree views, and I loved it. I moved in. Every time I got home from work, I looked around. I could see Yankees scoring a home run. Amazing. I could see LaGuardia plane taking off. After 2 months, I had to force myself to look out the window. My godfather was in Auschwitz. He's still alive. He told me, he doesn't talk as much anymore, but he tells me you get used to it. I said, well, you get used to it. You get used to that. Can you imagine? We're very good at getting used to things. So anything that's happened, we automatically say, well, that's past. We don't deal with exponential very well because we're historically, or, in our history, exponential never really existed. Animals don't run exponentially faster. They might accelerate on a straight line and then stop. So that is my view on AI. My view on AI is that we are building these technologies to replace what we do. They are already doing it in so many domains better than we can. And it's just step by step by step. And I have a chapter in my book called Boiling the Frog. And I think it's a myth actually, but if you put a frog into boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put it into warm water and slowly boil it, it dies. And we're almost going through that with AI. And, these TikTok is 4 years old? The guy's already been asked to step down, and it's moved into the Chinese infrastructure. That is not, I know friends of my children, friends of my sons who watch it for 6 hours a day. They get it, they're literally living in TikTok. 4 years old. So and all TikTok is doing is learning what they like and feeding them more and more and more. That computer is already controlling them. And it's paid, or it's rewarded on successfully trapping them into watching more and more and more. That's all it does. And so we are really quickly, I was just about to say slowly, but it's not slowly, we are really quickly giving our entire attention, not to the real experts in the world, but to technologies that are deciding that the best things for us are those that keep us engaged, and those things tend to be things that trigger us.
Very good answer, and I subscribe what you said, and I like some of the analogies, and especially how this is impacting the day-to-day activities. And I think to wrap up, because we're passing close, I think a record for this, but I think it's a great conversation, is where do we stay then as humans? Because I think this is the question that I think us as technologists and business people and investors and strategists, is that, of course, like you in the beginning, you said, how I define humanity and you is more or less aligned, but then as humans, of course, we manage to do wonderful things and terrible things. So what it does, because in the end of the day, it's obvious that there will be a second iteration of humans, and we are already there, because everyone spends around 5 to 6 hours, sometimes 10 hours in front of the device. This is already kind of a way of cyborging. and the devices are interacting with us. So there's a lot of machine interaction and as well data interaction as well. And we didn't even touch biogenetics and bioengineering. So I just want to, it's another big question, but just summary probably to sum up. And it comes back to the beginning of the interview, of course, as someone that is the son of both a Jewish and both a German after the Second War. I think it's an interesting one right now, because the next kind of I would say the Third World War will be probably won by machines and AIs. So I just want to probably finish this, and in an open way. I'm sure we're going to have another time to go through this.
What is a human? Okay, well, I have a chapter in my thought piece which is people are extraordinary. So we have to go back to that, you know, diversity of thought, adaptability. We've been around for a long time. We've mastered the world for a long time. Our use of technology is likely to make the world a better place. The last decade was the best decade for us. So whilst I worry about these things, I'm not pessimistic about these things, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing, but we need to be conscious. It's so important to remember that what one person thinks is good, another person thinks is bad. And that's not because they're good or bad people. It's because of the way that they've been brought up and what their view on the world, you know, I might find a cartoon of Muhammad okay, and my neighbor finds a cartoon of Muhammad not okay. And there's no right and wrong. It's just the way that we brought up. And we've got to be conscious that we are not going to be homogeneous people. We're not going to be all the same, and it would be disastrous if we were, and that would be not a great world to live in. We also have to be conscious that we have humor, we have, you know, enormous capabilities to love, to argue, to debate, all these things that are really important. So that to me is a really positive statement. But I don't know if I can answer your question particularly, what is a human, but there was something I learned about 2 years ago, actually from the ex-chief rabbi of the UK, Rabbi Lord Sachs, who unfortunately died last year during lockdown very suddenly. But he gave an event at a company called Tortoise Media, and it was in March last year, just before lockdown, and he'd written a book on ethics. And he asked a question at the beginning: where do people get their ethics from? And interestingly, going back to your opener with this, 95% of people said their parents, which is cool, you know. So, you know, that's really important. We're family, we're community. But the thing he said that I really took to heart, and it's about the good and the bad. It's about the gene for altruism. So he said that Charles Darwin could not understand why the gene for altruism existed. Because it shouldn't, because a person that would sacrifice themselves for the good of the society shouldn't exist anymore, because they get wiped out. But actually, the theory goes that communities work best with a balance of competition and altruism. And so we naturally, as communities, move into that way. And I think as we learn, hopefully very beneficially, to live with the intelligence and the creations we create, we will fall into that. And I think that's really important to this. The other thing that I find fascinating, and again, it goes back to my family, my wife, whose office I'm in, she is she's an executive function ADHD coach. So she looks after people with ADHD and these sort of features. I call them features. Apparently I have them, apparently my kids have them, my father had them, my father-in-law has them, that sort of feature set. And it seems to me there is a lot more ADHD now than there was 100 years ago. Now there's an argument that that's because we are identifying it better. And that may be true. My sort of argument is actually it's human evolution getting used and getting ready for the next phase of what we need. We went from an industrial revolution with an education system that was about you need to follow these rules, you need to take instruction, blah, blah, which was perfectly industrial. We need to move to an education system that focuses on cognitive revolution, which is creative, etc. But it seems to me that maybe our gene system is already preparing us, and that we are reacting very quickly to the environment that's coming up. So that gives me enormous hope. And, you know, people with ADHD and creativity go through a very hard teenage years on the whole, but afterwards they turn out to be the people that do the greatest things, have the most creativity in the world. And if that is really what's happening, then you know, that could be phenomenal for what we're going to see.
Well, fantastic way of wrapping up, and I completely love the way you put it. So thank you so much for your time and generosity as well. There's a fantastic interview, and I'm going back to it myself, because there's a lot of ideas here that definitely will be. I wish you luck to finish the book, and hopefully the next one will be to talk about that and really make it a really very successful, but as well a touching book that can actually illuminate and create more directions, because I think that's what we need as well. So thank you so much, Daniel. It's been a privilege.
Thank you very much, Dinis. I really appreciate it, and hope to see you very soon.